feeling really seamless to us, that conversation about play and attunement and attention comes before we get into child-parent psychotherapy and what that looks like within BHIP. So worked out okay. What we hope to do today, this is sort of an extension of a CPP presentation that happened, that I did like 3 years ago or so, which is on the iDrive, and so some of these slides are similar. What I tried to do was really sum up some of that introductory sort of theoretical stuff, and really just bring out the ones that I feel like fit with BHIP the most. And so we'll review those, we'll go over some CPP skills specifically within the context of a case. And we have 2 cases. Christina is going to talk about them. One of which is very much sort of a typical well-functioning child visit type of situation, but the other one is a little bit more juicy and more applicable to CAP age children, so we're probably going to skip to that one for the sake of time and some greater discussion. And so that will lead in again to sort of the trauma lens of CPP and how critical that is. And then just a function, sort of a wrap-up of reflective functioning and where we hope that can go within BHIP broadly. All right, so in thinking about child-parent psychotherapy, please raise your hand if you have not heard of child-parent psychotherapy. I'm going to call you out because I think everybody has. Okay, so core components of it are all things that each one of us possesses in BHIP and use regardless of what age I think we're treating, which is really critical to remind ourselves. One is observing behavior. So CPP is a huge advocate for the therapist being a conduit between the parent and the child, just as Janelle and Paulina were describing in some of those interactions. And so that observation tool is really, really important. Engaging within a system. Right, so we work with how many individuals can you think of in a day that you come across with regarding a child, from a nurse to a front desk staff member to a PCP to a parent, a school, etc. And again, acting as that conduit, so using yourself as a translator, but being very mindful of what impacts what you translate and what you don't. So CPP is very focused as well on what parts of a case bring up things for you that are particularly challenging. And there's a whole, a litany of sort of, what's the word? Supervisory practices that kind of go into working through that, which leads to the sort of capacity for self-reflection that as a therapist you attempt to build in yourself in order to then build that into a parent who can then build that into a child. So there's sort of just an ongoing wheel of that. And then at the core root of it is understanding the role of temperament, trauma, and attachment within the development of problematic behaviors in young children. So thinking about this as dyadic treatment, right? Within primary care, we don't often have the privilege really of like hour-long sessions, and that's not what we're there for, right? That's not our model of care, and it shouldn't be necessarily. But in thinking about that, the way we approach even an intake, the way we ask questions about a presenting problem, our goal is to balance our attention between the child and the caregiver, even in that process. I know that myself, even if it's a consult and I'm talking to a parent about tantrums and about their life and a child is playing, just the constant ping-ponging back and forth between the parent and the child and that interaction being really critical. Like, who do you seem to align yourself with and maybe why, right? Is there something that's coming up for you with the parent that you're like, oh, I'm going to focus more on this kid right now? And CPP is a constant sort of self-reflective process of what are you doing in the room and why are you doing it? Holding both perspectives, right? So giving voice to and also validation and respect to the fact that the parent and the child can have equally different perspectives about this situation, but both are really important to highlight. Translating that. Right? So do you speak for the child in such a way that can hopefully get a parent to sort of build some theory of mind, which increases their ability for that self-reflective practice, and doing so while the child is playing, or if a child does something like in the way that Janelle was doing it so nicely in that video of turning away or trying to attempt to change the activity. Can you highlight that in such a way that you're just labeling something rather than passing judgment in some sort of way? And then again, the ways that you intervene are all designed to build the relationship, right? In Healthy Steps, we always say that the relationship is our patient, which can feel like this kind of amorphous, okay, so what am I really doing there in the room, right? And so even what we hope to highlight are ways that what we talk about in a consult of tantrums or in a well child visit with a 6-month-old, the way we talk about those things is done such that it promotes an attachment relationship, an attachment context, rather than just developmental guidance that a pediatrician might provide. All right, so again, this is real-time observation, right? And I think that this is something that we are all constantly doing. Much of the time I find a challenge for myself is I am doing this a lot in my head throughout a visit, and it doesn't always come out of my mouth. Right? So I'll notice something going on and I'll have a reaction, and then I won't necessarily say something and try to sort of divert the attention because I'm like, all right, I have 15 minutes before I have to go to that room, and then I have a meeting in 20 and I'm going to be late for both, so what am I going to do? And so I think that that's one of those moments where it's really okay, and CPP often encourages us to do this, where we pause and notice our own interaction, our own response, and actually bring it into the context of the room. So whew, that stomp really actually kind of startled me. What do you think he's feeling? Right? Or if a child runs out of a room and I'm like, okay, we just got to get the kid and go there. I'm like, I'm really kind of nervous right now actually about your kid. How are you feeling about that? Right? So bringing your own interactions into it, not necessarily in sort of a self-disclosure, oh, this is what I think about you, and let me tell you about what my experience was with this, whatever, but more in a way to highlight that you as well have these reactions that the parent might be having, and it would be really nice for them to know that someone else also feels that way. And then just observing how they responded to one another. And I think allowing and holding that potentially those negative interactions that you see that can be so uncomfortable, right? And allowing for them to be uncomfortable, but still giving the parent and the child equal attention, and allowing for there to be a space for that level of distress can be really uncomfortable. And I think a lot of the times we'll be in situations where, parents really feel a lot of judgment from other people around them when their interactions with their children are not going well. And I think for us to just be in the room and just be like, I'm still going to pay as much attention to you as I can. I'm going to be as non-judgmental and as much of a listener as possible. And I really care about this not always feeling this way for you. And that message, I think, is really important. So a big component of CPP as well is the idea of the ghosts in the nursery that are constantly around us. And so those are the things that, for parents in particular, right, we're talking ACEs, a variety of other types of experiences, but they come out in situations in which oftentimes there is that sort of lack of attunement between a parent and a child, and it feels odd, but you're like, nothing particularly bad just happened, but something feels strange, like there was a shift. Why did you look away? Why did you get out your phone? Right? Something like that. And so I'm wondering for you guys, even with older kids, Healthy Steps related kids, in those moments, do you feel like you see them? What prevents you from saying them? And how do you yourselves elicit that conversation of building a parent's ability to reflect back on their past? Are there things that, key things that you say, or even an introductory sentence to the idea that something they might be responding to and unaware of is in the room? Any ideas? And it's intense, right? And it's really kind of affectively triggering and uncomfortable. So I think that's oftentimes what prevents us from saying something. But if you know about a parent's history and there's some aspect of it, I think that can make it a little bit easier. If you're aware of what ACEs they've experienced or they've disclosed things to you. And so from that point, maybe Not if you're skeptical, but if you're pretty sure there's something going on, how do you bring it up?
So I usually don't bring up what they're doing, but I'll say something like, let's say the kid like took the chair and like threw it on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
and the mom just like turned her body.
Mm-hmm.
I might say like, that was really hard for you to see.
Mm-hmm.
You really didn't like when he did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of just give a little space. And then to say something to kind of hopefully bring them back in a little bit.
Yeah.
I tend not to comment on their behavior or what they're doing because I get a lot of pushback.
For sure. But I think that that's a really, really important part, is that you can say a statement and then sit in that statement, right? And that's powerful even if there's no conversation about what you both know you're talking about, right? If that makes sense? Yeah.
I usually like to anchor it in values and how we get those values. So I might say, like, it's really important that he use respectful language for you. Is that something that you learned growing up, or is that something you didn't learn growing up and it's important to you now? Not really sure, but it seems like that's a really important value. So I just try and anchor it more in values than behaviors. And sometimes that feels a little less intimidating maybe for parents.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if this is similar, but I feel like sometimes with older teens and their parents, I'll try to validate the underlying emotion I see. So maybe the one that's outward is more angry, but then I'll usually tap into like, I'm imagining that you're really worried that so-and-so is going to be making some of the same mistakes, we've talked about that you made when you were younger, and that you really want to make sure they're on the right path or something. Kind of acknowledge the parent's own history and sort of the underlying emotion that I'd rather them express.
Yes, for sure. Erica?
What comes up a lot is things that are perceived very aggressively. A slap towards the face, or throwing the toy at mom, or throwing the toy anywhere, throwing down the chair. Stuff like that I think when the parent had trauma, or the child's other parent was abusive, but then that's like super triggering.
Yes, and it's super common, right?
Sometimes in moments like that, I say, I wonder how that felt or how it feels when she yells like that. Or
Is that a familiar feeling to you? Like, does that happen a lot in your life with other people? And then I think it's also something that Janelle said that I really loved, was the idea that you as that conduit can use yourself in physical space to promote a safe space, right? So you can use your body and things in the room, I think, to regulate people in those moments. And so even if you're not talking about it on a real bio-psychosocial response level, CPP would encourage that as well. If you sort of are, moving yourself next to mom, not like looking at her, but you're there, that there's that kind of some sort of protection, can be very helpful. Okay, and then I'll breeze through a lot of this, but you'll see in your handouts, one thing that we gave you guys was a list of trigger questions. I don't really love the word trigger, especially right now in the context of firearms in our society, so I would like to rename that. But it is a list of things that I think can open the conversation.
Talking points.
Yeah, talking points. Great. Wonderful. Can open the conversation about things that that are core to CPP, what it is, the parent's own history, the parent's own theory of mind, and can kind of promote that level of back and forth that doesn't necessarily root itself in content of development. So those are helpful to use, maybe picking one or two that you might want to try in a visit and see how it feels. Yeah. No, it's separate. Sorry. Yeah. So it was supposed to be passed around. There's a big pile. Oh, yeah. You're supposed. Yeah.
Should I hand these out too?
Yes, that's great. Okay, cool. And then Christina is going to add one more.
Another list of questions that help elicit reflective functioning.
So reflective. Yeah. Those are perfect.
I think that these not well-named trigger they're also a really good way to open up a conversation when you're walking into a healthy status visit and you're just not sure how to start it, right? Because there may not be an identified problem, and you're really just there to start building that relationship. This is a strategy for doing that.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so then briefly touching on reflective functioning, what it is and why it's important. I think we can all, that's the definition. I'm not going to read it to you. But important things that it does, one is establishing security and predictability in a relationship. And within the context of dyadic work, we're constantly trying to promote that level of security and consistency and predictability. These are some ways that you can explain that to parents using normal words, right? I think sometimes it's like, I want to help you develop a theory of mind for your child, which will help you stay calm when it's like, doesn't make any sense. So these are just some sound bites, I think, that can be helpful to practice saying out loud or to translate into your own words about why you might be talking a lot about how they're feeling rather than what the child is doing. Because I'll find sometimes in that conversation, right, of like, why are you constantly asking me about how this is going for me? Like, I'm telling you I can't sleep. Can you get my baby to sleep? Right? And I think sometimes I like to be very transparent and just say, I know this is weird, right? Like, I'm not really talking about what you're talking about right now. And let me tell you a little bit why. And so I think it's okay, depending on your level of comfort with that and with the parent, to sort of educate them as to what the process is that what you're doing. And so here are some ways in which, again, most of the time your gut is the best indicator, right? But when reflective functioning is not present, again, that word, I really should think of another thing. But these are just moments in which, you start to feel a sense of what the parent is saying or doing is not based on what's actually going on in front of you, but is based on something that they are thinking about, or that is, a whole slew of other things. And so it can be like a parent who's, for example, I would say like in, maybe the first couple months of a visit, of a child's life, and you're in a well-child visit, and they're sort of like, yeah, everything's fine. Everything's good. Yeah, we're good. And you're like, what? Like, you have 6 kids, you work 2 jobs, and you have a ton of help, but like, what do you mean everything's good? Like, that level of like shut off, right, from some kind of actual thing, especially when they are like not represented as things being okay in front of you directly. Negative attributions, dismissal of feelings, or an incorrect labeling of a feeling as well, right? And these are like the classic ones of like, my baby is so angry all the time. It's like, what do you mean by that? And so I think that those are moments in which you can dig a little bit deeper. Again, here's some language, I think, to use in a way to promote reflective functioning. In the absolute best way is, again, this idea of what we've been talking about all morning, that the parent or the caregiver, whoever is that responsible adult in the room, is the expert, right? And so you want to act like you really have no idea what is going on for that child, and that they are the ones who are going to tell you what it is that they need and why. And even if they get that wrong, it's important information, right? Because if that child is having a tantrum and a parent thinks that they need to get their ish together and settle down and just sit and be quiet, that's really important information about them, right? That you can use to understand how it is that they respond to their child's behavior. Okay, and then just a nod to the idea that while there are those very difficult people, places, experiences, situations that shape us, there are always also angels somewhere, right? And I think a great conversation with parents can be, especially like if you're doing the ACEs questionnaire in person, or you have it in front of you, or they answered it, or whatever, is talking about the people who did make them feel comforted and who were consistent and reliable, and what it was that they did, and just kind of having that expansive thought process. If they don't have anyone, they don't have anyone, and that's a real thing. But Say it again.
You will become.
You will become the angel, yeah. In 4 years of CPP, that's the goal. But so that's an important part to remember, right? Because we can often focus a lot and forget the resiliency piece of things. Okay, and the only last thing I'm going to say about this is we do this a lot, right? We speak for babies a lot, we translate, we do act as that conduit in the way that we use our bodies and our words and everything like that. I think an important thing to remember in that moment is sort of in a similar way to self-disclosure. CPP asks a lot of us to think about why we're doing that in the moment and what is it about us that wants to do that, right? Is the parent ready, like affectively, not necessarily intellectually, cognitively, to understand that? Are they regulated enough to hear what we have to say in that moment? And that's really critical, because I think sometimes we can do it because we want to, we align with the baby and we just want that baby to be happy, and we're distressed ourselves, and so we're just like constantly talking for the baby, and the parent's like, all right, well, she's obviously just knows my kid better than I do, you know? And so I think that's important, is when are you doing it and why? Okay, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
How are we on timing?
We're okay?
It's 24 into your 45.
Okay, great. Okay, good. Okay, so Kate did a great job running through like a summary of what the principles of CPP are and a little bit of how we use that in BHIP. The second half is going to be much more focused on case examples and, you know, what it actually looks like, because I think it can be a little bit vague and like a little, it's like a little high level sometimes. So we want to see like, what does that actually look like in a visit? I'm going to run through quickly, you know, this I think is probably the skill that we use the most. So taking everything that Kate talked about together, we want to help parents have what we call this empathic shift, where they understand, one, that behavior communicates meaning, and then also start to become more accurate in, you know, or at least like generally realistic, neutral, somewhat benevolent in their interpretations of the behavior. You know, there's not one way to interpret behavior. We don't really know what's going on in that baby's head, what they're thinking or feeling, but we want to at least address it if the parent's constantly negatively interpreting neutral behavior. Those are the kind of things that we want to try to shift in the direction where they start to see that behavior as developmentally appropriate and positive as much as possible. And then we know that parents who have this trauma history, they do tend to see things like babies hitting or crying as angry behavior or aggressive behavior, abusive behavior, and we want to try to help them stay in the present and think about, you know, what is going on with you and your baby, and can they move away from like all the things that have happened to them and the impact that that's having on this relationship. Okay. Which one do I press? There we go. Okay. So what does that look like? And basically, we want to, I think we overlap really well with the last presentation. So a lot of this is kind of review. We help to notice the behavior. We're just making objective comments. You know, oh, she's reaching up to you. She, you know, you gave her the book and she threw it on the floor. Really just kind of like what just happened, we label that. So kind of like bringing everyone in the room's attention to the behavior that's going on. If it seems appropriate, we can try to give developmental guidance. We do that a lot in Healthy Steps already. That's something that comes natural to us. But also, and knowing that in CPP, our goal is always to use the most simple, straightforward intervention first. If we can have the effect of changing a parent's behavior just by saying, you know, it's actually, you know, pretty common for kids at this age to have tantrums. Their feelings are really, you know, so big, and their brains don't have the capacity yet to make sense of what's going on. And sometimes just giving that information is enough for the parent to have that empathic shift. Then we want to start there, because that's going to be the easiest, and it's also, you know, the fastest. We're obviously always working in the interest of time. That's not going to work for every parent. Some parents, you have to dig deeper and get more into like that reflective functioning and figure out, you know, what might the behavior be telling us, and like where it's a little bit of going to be like a longer term process of helping them figure out, you know, what the behavior means to them and what else it could mean, and kind of bringing all those thoughts and feelings into the room. Does that make sense? So wanting to start with the thing that's the most simple and most direct, and then going into the reflection if it seems like that mom needs digging deeper. Okay. All right. Sorry. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this. This is, you can look in your PowerPoint, kind of like a review of what the skills we use in CPP and BHIP most often are. Okay, I'm going to spend 2 minutes on this one, just to give an example of what happens in a well child visit. So Amir, and this is an example from a family that I met 2 weeks ago, and it's not the best example. It's an example because we were thinking about CPP, and so it makes you more aware of cases where there's opportunities to use these skills. Okay, so Amira is being seen for a well child visit with her mom and her 2-month-old brother. She has a language delay. She's only saying a few words. She's referred by a resident a little bit for the language delay and also for behavior, and the resident actually said she's concerned about the interactions. Like, mom's been a little harsh during the visit. She's very kind of frustrated with the child. So shortly after introductions, the resident comes back in the room and gives the child a book. And the child takes the book. She had been pretty flat up till now. She was sitting in her stroller, sort of just she's not talking, so she's really not interacting much. She smiles, she grabs the book, she got excited, she opens it up, she all the way bends the binding back, and mom grabs the book, you're breaking it, puts it away, puts it in the backpack, and the child obviously protests and starts to cry and have a tantrum, and mom kind of dismisses it, pushes her back into the stroller. She's frustrated. So this is, I think it can be a pretty typical interaction that we see in a well child visit. And so I'm thinking, how do we use CPP principles to address that? I think the first thing that comes up is that you have to check in with yourself. So my immediate reaction is, I want to go get another book and give that child a book because I felt like I wanted to rescue her. I didn't like watching the parent do that. I immediately, in my head, aligned with the child. Obviously, I, didn't do anything about that. And fortunately, I'm aware enough of that feeling to say, okay, that means, I need to think about what's going to be best for this relationship. So I'm asking myself, how can I help the parent and the child connect? They're both having a hard time. What's something that I can do to support them? Slow it down a little bit. We don't always have time in these well child visits. We try to go as quickly as possible. When it's a case like this where the interactions are a little bit off and mom's being harsh, I'm going to have a little bit, as long as I can and it fits in my schedule, I'm going to have a little bit of a longer visit. This isn't going to be a 15-minute visit. I think I spent 45 minutes with this family, and this was a day that I could do that. But it's hard to use these principles effectively in a 15-minute visit. It's just, you need to slow it down a little bit. So just being aware of that. And then, what do I do? I start by naming the child's behavior and the feeling. And mom's behavior as well. You took the book away and she got really upset. And just kind of wait and see what mom says. And mom, I think that's a neutral enough intervention that if mom does not want to engage with me in this reflective process, she's going to shut it down right there, and I'm going to be fine with that and be like, okay, she's not going there today, that's fine. This mom, even though she was not in really a good space, she was upset, she was calm enough and reflective enough that she could have that conversation. And so she says, she's gonna break it, and I really, I don't want her to ruin the book. I want to read it tonight with her and her brother. So basically, mom gave me that, I'm looking for the benevolence in that interaction. Mm-hmm. Mom snatches the book. It feels like a really mean thing to do to that child who's been sitting bored in the visit. She had a meaning for doing that. Mom was trying to save that book. They probably don't have that many books at home. She's trying to hold on to that as something that she got from the doctor that they're going to do together at home, and she wants to keep it nice. So I find that, you really want to make it special. You're going to keep the book for later. She, then kind of process, like, what do you think she's thinking, she's feeling? So we talk a little bit about that. Is there anything, and the child's still upset at this point, so then we talk about, is there anything that might make her feel better since she can't have the book? So helping the parent to try to comfort the child and making the parent the expert in that interaction. Like, what is something we might be able to do? And mom, came up with, they had given her a coloring book that she could bend and rip and whatever, and they had put it away. And mom was able to take that back out and give that to her. So that's kind of like, and I also translated for the child what was going on with the parent. Mom put the book away because she wants to keep it nice so you guys can read it later. So even though she's 2 and she might not, mom wasn't really able to say that to her. She wasn't like thoughtful enough in that moment to say it to her. So by saying it, hopefully the child gets a little bit of that. I'm kind of trying to translate and help them get on the same page. And so, that's a really, really small thing, but it seems like then later in the visit, mom was more attuned. Mom asked for another book, and when I came back, she let the child look at it. And then later when the child was getting shots, I kind of had to support it a little bit, but mom was holding the 2-month-old and the child was upset. And I said, would you like me to hold the baby? And she said, oh yeah, and she goes and holds the 2-year-old for the shot so that she could comfort her. So just kind of like bringing, and it turned out mom, was very depressed, and so there were lots, there was lots of reasons why she was reacting in that way. Bringing a little bit of her attention to the child's feelings and to what happened, it was received pretty quickly in that moment. So that's a time when it can be really helpful, just in a well-child visit. Okay, so now we're going to just do a little shift, and we're going to go more towards the trauma aspect of CPP, which I think is really helpful because this is relevant for everyone, not just the healthy steps people in the room. So when we talk about trauma-informed care through a CPP lens, we want to assess for trauma for every, because we know a child can come in for all types of referral concerns, and we always want to figure out if there's trauma that's been impacting it. So we already do that in BHIP, which is great. And then we want to create a space where the trauma can be brought into the room. In a lot of, unfortunately, there's still a lot of places where, unless the child or the parent directly brings it up, even when there's trauma that's happening, everyone kind of colludes and doesn't talk about the trauma because it's hard to bring up and it's really uncomfortable. And trauma-informed care from CPP and from, a lot of trauma models is that you want to, as long as the parent and the child seem ready, you want to bring it in the room. You want to make it a space where they can talk about it. That's a really important part of the process. And then how do we do that? And then I love this idea. So in CPP, the idea is to restore the parent's protective shield. So basically, whenever a trauma happens, for any child, but especially for younger children, the parent, even if the parent had nothing to do with the trauma, they lose a little bit of that protective shield because that child got hurt. And when you're little, you hopefully think that your parent's going to protect you from everything and keep you safe. And that's a good thing. We want kids to feel like their parent can keep them safe. And when you get hurt, you start to wonder, is the world a safe place?